Hey guys, welcome back. So, if I asked you how many patients per day do you or any physician in your group need to see to break even, could you answer that easily? And it's okay if you can't, but today that is what we're going to be focusing on. So, it's often that we see practices that know their top line, right? That gross revenue that's coming in, or maybe you have a guess on what you think your profit margin is, but you can't really explain the costs it takes to keep those physicians or providers covered every month, and that you truly know that break even number when it comes to patient visits per day. And that's important, right? Because that single number changes everything. If you know that you need a patient volume to be 20 patients per day and you have a physician who is seeing consistently 15 patients a day, then you know that there needs to be a way to get that patient number up. Or say you hire somebody and they only want to see 15 patients a day, but you know your break-even number is 20. That's a problem. And so today we're going to go through kind of the math behind the cost to carry the seat, so to speak. Basically, that financial foundation for running a profitable, scalable practice. Because if you don't know this number, you're flying blind. We often talk about the billing metrics, right? We're a billing company. We talk about billing metrics. We talk about AR and denials and all those things, which are very, very important. But all of that could be perfect, but you can still be losing money and feeling like your practice is failing if you don't have the profitability down. So I think it's important to understand both of these. And so we're going to be using our experience with other practices and some consulting that we've done to help frame this. This is going to be a two-part episode so that you can kind of understand the basics and then apply those to provider compensation so that both of those can go hand in hand when you're hiring and when you're trying to really balance growth in your practice. Now, of course, why does this matter, right? If you know these numbers, you know how to hire right. You know how to know if you need to be pushing marketing or pushing your physician or your providers to go out there and get more patients, or if potentially you need to be hiring. So today we're going to first start with kind of two types of costs. And I think it's important to understand these nuances so that you can calculate everything else. So first is overhead. So this is basically what you pay no matter how many patients walk in the door. So that is your staff that are hired, rent, software, insurance, things like that that don't tend to go up and down. So say that's supplies, right? Gloves or lab fees if you have to pay a lab fee in order to get patients drawn, for example, or some sort of transaction cost. So say a credit card fee processor, something that rises with volume. And it's important that you segregate both of those. And so you can work with your accountant, but really to kind of segregate, okay, what is my overhead? What is what I'm paying in every single month? It's important to trend those monthly, to review those as the CEO every single month, because you may catch an increase in, say, a phone system. We had a practice that was looking at their expenses. They saw an increase in their phone system, that it was costing them thousands of dollars every month. And they were able to cut that down much, much lower than that with a more affordable option. And so important to kind of track each of those every month, evaluate if you still need those items, right? If you go to bid for something that's really expensive, are there ways to cut expenses? Those variable costs you're going to want to track and trend so that you know on a per patient basis, is your practice profitable? And we'll talk a bit about that. Now, in most practices, of course, we know overhead makes up the majority of expenses. This is staff salaries. This is your rent, your software, things like that. If you're providing benefits for your staff, those are all things that are going to be a really large expense. And that's normal. But you want to know what those numbers are. And so, and then you can kind of understand, okay, is that 60% of my gross revenue is going to overhead, which is not uncommon, but then you want to know the details around that and tracking and trend that. So that enables you to then think, how much overhead does each provider have to carry on their back before the practice makes any sort of profit? And that then becomes the cost to carry their seat. So we're going to use an example, it's a made-up example, but I think it helps kind of just frame the discussion. And again, all of this is going to be put into a blog as well. We're going to do a two-part blog so that if you're listening to this, you can just listen and then go to that blog to help write down the numbers and think through the numbers so that you can start pulling through your numbers. I'm working on actually an Excel spreadsheet plus also an application that you can put your numbers into and output a final profitability number, just something super simple and quick, but enables you, if you don't have something already, a tool for this, this is an option. So let's go back to our practice example. Riverside Medical, again, we'll just say this is a multi-provider. We've got a mix of physicians and APPs with an internal medicine practice. And say they're collecting $4 million per year. Say they have 4 full-time physicians, 2 APPs, which equals technically 5 full-time providers, right? With those APPs splitting each 1 FTE position. Now, they spend $2.4 million annually on things like overhead. So that's going to be their staff, their rent, their software, insurance, marketing, etc. So that $2.4 million divided by 5 is going to be dollars per provider per year that they have to cover, so to cover their seat, so to speak. So before a single physician or APP earns a bonus or draws a profit, the practice must generate $480,000 just to keep the lights on that covers their share. Now, this is a lot easier because we're making them all a kind of FTEs. Now, if you have some providers who just work 4 days a week or 2 days a week, you'll want to calculate it based on their portion of as a full FTE. So now we're going to go through some of the calculations. Now that we've kind of understood some basic principles around overhead and variable costs, pull all those numbers together. We're going to go through 3 calculations in this episode and 2 calculations in the next episode to help you think through profitability in your practice. So the first is calculating your cost to carry the seat, right? So this is that big number that we want to make sure that you understand. So again, you're going to want to understand your annual overhead divided by the number of full FTEs. Again, if you have 2 part-time people, that equals 1 FTE. Calculate it per FTE, and then you can kind of divvy it up to people who are part-time. Then that becomes the cost to carry. Now, your overhead is going to be all admin staff, benefits, rent, utilities, insurance, or billing. Basically, the majority of your cost is going here. Office supplies, marketing, everything is going to be in here. Basically, anything that you'd still pay if no patient showed up tomorrow. Now, it does not include any sort of direct costs like vaccines or labs, because if no patient showed up, you would stop ordering those things. Now, we'll want to track those in a different bucket. So you still want to track vaccines, lab costs, all of those other things, but they're kind of in a different bucket. Then you're going to want to evaluate your physicians and their collections compared to their cost to carry. So let's go back to our example, Riverside Medical, where they had a $480,000 overhead per FTE. So if one provider brings in $1 million and minus the $480,000 means they've got $520,000, which is then available for provider compensation. Because remember, we have not started counting salaries yet. That's in a different bucket. So your overhead is excluding your provider salaries. That is just, really just keeping the staff in the door, the lights on, insurance, software, that sort of thing. Your billing costs does go in there as well. That's all of the stuff to keep the practice running. Back to our example, you have $1 million in collections coming from this one specific physician. $480,000 is what we calculated is that cost to carry their seat against those 5 FTEs. So that's $520,000 left, which then you can use to pay a physician from, have any profit, or reinvest in growth if you wanted to hire somebody else, and you'll want to start thinking through these buckets, because I think it's very common for folks to say, it's time for me to hire, but that person maybe isn't going to ramp up for 6 months. Then what is your plan for profitability? How are you going to compensate people during that first 6 months? Are there things you can do to mitigate their ramp up time? So really important for you to think through that. Now, if another physician is only generating $600,000 in collection, that leaves just $120,000 after overhead. Now, again, you have to pay them. So this all really helps you understand how many patients do they need to see per day to cover themselves. If we know that their goal is to see 20 or 25, 30 patients a day, then what is that number that we anticipate them bringing in every single year? Because then we can start to figure out the right compensation model for those individuals. Of course, we commonly see that bring physicians in and they're not covering themselves, and then the entire practice feels stressed. You're not getting a paycheck as a CEO, yet you're still doing a full patient load. So really important to know these numbers. Now, the last step is the break-even reality. This is where it's really important for you to understand this from a patient number perspective. So say you've got that $480,000 to cover your seat, right? That's the number that they must cross before they are profitable for your practice. So now below that line, right, you're subsidizing them out of your own paycheck. Above that, you're going to be adding to your bottom line, right? Adding profitability. All right. So say we know that your practice traditionally brings in $150 per patient visit, right? On average. Again, high level. Don't need to get into the weeds on this, just high level. So then if that individual, in order to cover their seat, bringing in $480,000 or needs to bring in $480,000 again, just to cover themselves, they need to be then seeing 3,200 patients per year, which is not that high of a number. Again, say you're open 240 days out of the year, that's 13 patients a day. Again, that's your break-even point. Now, say you're open 260 days a year, you have to understand how many days a year you're open. Do you have Saturdays open? Are you open full 5 days a week? Those are kind of some of the things you need to think through. So again, that's 13 patients per day. Again, at $150 per patient visit on average in net receipts. And that's open 240 days a year. So below that, you're obviously subsidizing them. And above that, every additional $150 patient that is seen grows to your bottom line. So then the ROI on hiring somebody. So now say you want to hire a new physician. Again, right now we know that your overhead is $2.4 million. And so that's spread across 5 FTEs. Now, say you were to spread that across 6 FTEs, that means that it's $400,000 per seat. Now, that's, of course, if you're not adding additional overhead. Oftentimes, there is going to be some increase in overhead when you bring somebody on. Maybe that's another half of an MA. Maybe that's additional billing expenses, software expenses. And so you'll want to kind of estimate that so that then you can get to that overhead that is going to be split between all of the seats or all of the FTEs so that you can think through what is the cost to carry each seat. And those then become powerful ways for you to understand what it would take to fill their patient volume in order to get to a profitable point. So if the new physician generates $800,000 or $1 million in revenue every year, and their share of overhead is still around that $400,000, then the practice just created an additional $400,000 or $600,000 in revenue. Now, again, that's before salary and bonuses. So you've got to then think through, okay, if I'm paying this person $200,000, then we've got another, $200 to $400 in margin. Then, say you do a 25% bonus on top of that, you know that there is room to pay that person bonus and what that would look like. And then the rest is profit for your company. So you don't need to obsess over these numbers. Right? You don't have to get down to every single penny in terms of receipts per patient that comes in, right? You just have to look at some high value numbers so that you can kind of walk away with some estimates here. Obviously, in your financial reviews that you do with your accountant and tracking and trending expenses, get down to those pennies and cents, understand where your money is going, just like you do personally with your budget. But this really enables you to understand high level. So I really, really highly consider that if you and your practice owners don't understand the number of patients that is needed to be seen every single day for each of your physicians in order to break even or make a profit, sit down and have that conversation with your accountant, come up with these numbers, and then assess whether your physicians are truly making a profit for your company or if you are subsidizing them from your own pocket. This also enables you to understand how far do I push marketing? Are they, are their appointments slots full? How many patients could they see more per day? Because they may be saying, I'm swamped, I'm busy, I'm seeing 15 patients a day. But if you know profitability, it just hit at 13 patients and they need to be seeing 20, 25, 30, then you need to adjust the schedule. You need to adjust really expectations around the role and the job. Because again, small businesses, it takes a village. You all have to be on the same page, and kind of talking about those things will only help everybody from a transparency perspective. So this is one of the most important things that you can do for your business, is understanding these numbers. We talk a lot about billing metrics, but want to make sure that these metrics are also something you understand. If you are enjoying these episodes, please head over to our Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Leave us a review. It means a world of a difference. If you are looking for a billing course, head on over to our website, NatrevMD.com. We've got a book. We've got, obviously, the podcast, the billing course, all kinds of free resources for you and your team. So on our next episode, we're going to take this even further. We're going to show you how to design physician compensation, again, back to this cost to carry the seat model, as you scale and as they increase their patient load, so that you don't lose your margins. Really, really important that as you're running a business, you understand and take care of the bottom line, because at the end of the day, that's what keeps your doors open, so that you can take care of your patients. All right, have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.